All right, thank you very much for this invitation. It's always a challenge to speak to other professional communities. The dialogue between communities is not always an easy one, as we know from universities. But I think one of the key issues I would want to talk about for this international summit is how geo is actually influencing governance and how governance should influence the geo community. I think that's a challenge for the public sector. My point of view is the public sector. All of our research in Leuven at the Public Sector Governance Institute is how the transformation within the OECD countries of the public sector, and of course that includes the handling of data in general and geodata in particular. One of my colleagues, Joep Kromvoets, was here yesterday, and I suppose he talked to you, to this audience here. We had some major projects also under the umbrella of Euro SDR. So actually the arrow goes in the two directions. You have the governance of the geospatial information, but you also have the geospatial information that has an impact on governance. And what I would like to do is and I was invited to be a bit provocative, if that is at all possible, to say, why is the obvious not happening? I think it's an interesting issue when I talk to the civil servants and those in charge in general, but also those that are in charge of the geodata in the public sector, that they are sometimes surprised. We have all this rich data, we have all this information, and why is it not used? Why don't they use it? Why doesn't it happen? And I think I will give you 5 elements of what I think are crucial issues in this interaction, which explain, and from the analysis perhaps also to see what there is to do how this could be solved, how we could make the obvious happen. And the obvious is, of course, evidence-based service delivery, evidence-based policies, and the evidence is the geodata. I have 5 points which I will explain. So first of all, why do we give the right answers to the wrong questions? That's a bit of rhetorical phrasing. Cost-benefit analysis, we just heard about this too. From solutions to problems, the issue of academic disciplines and the professions, the gap between professions and professionals, and then geo versus organizations. This is the structure. All right, so the first is giving the right answers to wrong questions. And I have summarized this to say this is actually an issue of supply and demand. If you look at this matrix, it's about geodata that is requested, that is needed, and we have geodata that is supplied. And you have, to simplify the story, 4 zones. And the first zone is one of ignorance. We don't ask for information and we don't supply information. And suddenly a rock falls on our head and we are all surprised. It happens. So the question is if future studies could solve that we can anticipate and look into the future for the purpose of service delivery and crisis management in particular. But it's interesting to see that there are also 2 zones of frustration which exist. You have the geo-provider frustration zone, which is supplying information, but for one reason or another it is not used. And the fit for purpose question, of course, emerges then. It was this morning already mentioned, and I see the poster of the Dutch Cadastre too, fit for purpose. And it was also answered by Vellinga this morning from Wageningen, what is fit for purpose. But on the demand side, we also observe that sometimes there is a need for geo information, and it is not provided for a range of reasons here. And then if you have the degrees of matching with different degrees of satisfaction here. Now on the demand side, and I'm sure you have experienced that too. It is quite common that people who need this information actually cannot phrase what they want. So the knowledge there is not always to that extent that they can formulate what they precisely need. But sometimes they certainly know what they don't need. And so this tension here is confronted with the supply defined, as it was mentioned this morning too. So it requires a kind of flexibility in the supply and a kind of guidance to try to phrase the demand and what is needed to provide information. And so what we actually need is a kind of, this does not happen automatically. The shift to the fourth zone is not happening, to the D zone is not happening automatically. So this needs to be organized. And the way to organize it is so that's the to-do list, to shift from a supply-driven approach to demand to a demand-driven approach to supply. And I know that this sounds a bit abstract, but it has to be defined at the level of service delivery and policy development itself. So this is the kind of principle to be used. And to reduce the frustration zones and increase the matching zones. These are, let's say, formal answers. The way to do that is negotiations, dialogues, and participation. I think to bring supply and demand together requires the communities to come together to facilitate the definition of what is needed so that it can be supplied as features of data which can be evidence for the service delivery and the policy development. Sometimes it's negotiations. Why negotiations? Because sometimes data are available but legally not available. Privacy issues are in the game, ownership issues are in the game, price issues are in the game, and so this is a negotiation issue. But the dialogue is also on how to define the fit for purpose, how to define that. And participation, we've heard about bottom-up. I think bottom-up is, I mean, sometimes if I would ask who is against bottom-up, not many people would dare to say, well, I'm against that. So then I always say, if we all agree that this is important, it means we all have a different definition of it. And we actually disagree on the content of what it really means. And I think that's an important point. We don't need just bottom-up, we need framed bottom-up, because it's actually a combination of top-down and bottom-up which needs to be developed. There's a crucial issue in how to match supply and demand. There are three major mechanisms which are combined, but I will explain them in different steps. Three different ways to combine, to match supply and demand. It's hierarchy, markets, and networks. And hierarchies, of course, has to do with organizations, and where one is on top and the other is not on top, and they have a kind of relationship and they can enforce or make the match happen. That's one mechanism. It's a legally defined way to institutionally defined way to combine and to bring together supply and demand. The second is the market mechanisms. And again, the question is, to what extent are we marketizing, as supply and demand, marketizing the geo community from the point of view of the public sector, of course. You could create quasi-markets even within the public sector, and that happens in part of the modernization processes in certain countries. But to have this market mechanism is another issue where as a strategy to bring supply and demand together. And then you have networks. Networks are actually communities with a shared objective, with shared values, trusting one another. It could be citizens and a municipality, for example, but where you create networks to bring supply and demand together. It's not or, it's and. So we have to create a kind of optimal mix of hierarchy, markets and networks to move into the D zone of the matching intensity of supply and demand. That's the first point. The second thing is the cost and benefits. We just heard it in the previous presentation by the Trimble example, the nice graphs on costs and the nice figures on the benefits. But of course, the government does not exist. It does not exist, the government. It's levels of government, it's precise organizations, and the consolidation is not always there. I mean, that's the difference between macroeconomists, of course, and management people in public administration, where you look at the issue from the point of view of single organizations and clusters in this public field. The costs, I think we all know what it means: creating, transferring, collecting, processing, storing, making available. The benefits, that's a bit of a different story: comparing, registering, change, improve decisions. You know, we go from, instead of that sewage system to another sewage system, better allocation of resources, transparency, etc. The issue here, as a kind of challenge, is that costs and benefits are actually asymmetric. If you look at costs from the time perspective, they are immediate. The benefits are more on the longer term. If you look at tangibility, well, costs are very tangible. You can't touch it. It's direct, and the benefits are indirect and sometimes conditional. You know, if you don't use the information to take better decisions, you don't have the benefit. You have the cost, but not the benefit. The measurability is different. How do you measure? I mean, of course, you could have complex models to simulate potential benefits, but it's easier to measure the costs than to assess the benefits. And the locus too. Where does it happen? Well, the costs happen in one organization, and sometimes the benefits are for another organization or a set of organizations or a society. And so that creates a kind of natural disequilibrium between costs and benefits. And that makes it difficult, not unsolvable. So what does it mean for us here? If you have a kind of natural deficit between costs and benefits in the dynamics of the evolution of this field, well, you need to control the cost. I think that's everybody understands that, but we need to push the benefits, but we even have to push the perception of the benefits. You see, it's like justice. That's a famous expression in English. You know, justice should... I'm sorry, yes, but I'm sure you have justice in Scotland too. Justice, not only justice should be done, justice should be seen to be done. It should be seen to be done. And that's the same for the benefits of geodata. It should not be just be there, it should be seen to be there. And I think to make it visible, you know, the word performance, I've done my whole research career was around performance in the public sector. Performance has a double meaning. It is not just the results, but it's also putting something on stage. You know, you said, like for jazz or opera, it was a nice performance. So you have to demonstrate and show this, these benefits. And I think that was also the point, as the first speaker, Vellinga, said, no, not a 280-page report from Ghent, the city of Ghent, which is in Flanders, which is my region, but to have one graph, you know, that's actually demonstrating and showing it's actually organizing the perception of the benefits. I think that's a crucial point to balance, to rebalance, and to have a positive balance in the cost-benefit analysis story. A third issue is about trajectories of reform in the public sector. And trajectories of reform are complex transformations of systems which are more complex than just one problem, one solution, and a one-to-one relationship between this problem and this solution. What we observe, and actually the whole geo-data integration in service delivery and policy cycles in the public sector as part of evidence-based service delivery and policy development, has to do with this too. It's a sequence of problems and solutions. So I just will give you a short summary of how the trajectory in some OECD countries has happened as far as transformation of this public sector is concerned. The problem has been for a long time the lack or the perceived lack of performance, taking responsibility and being accountable, transparent, control, etc. But if we focus this on the geo side of this, you know, the performance of the geo story here and the problems of the lack of performance or not making it happen. Then we move to a solution. And the solution was actually very much pushed by OECD. It was to create agencies. And some countries have been quite entrepreneurial in creating agencies, meaning separate organizations to do a specialized thing. It became almost like a biblical statement, thou shalt create agencies and thou shalt be saved. That was actually the expression for many countries, and they have moved to the creation of agencies. That has had an enormous impact on the organization of data and the ownership of data, the collection of data, the distribution of data, the transaction costs between agencies, etc. It has a huge impact which was not actually anticipated initially. And so the specialization in the number, if you would see the graphs, we have made graphs of the number of organizations in the public sector. That means they all have to use information, and so the transaction costs increase there. That is actually enormous. But for a long time, or for a certain time, New Zealand was a champion in this shift here. We all thought, or some people thought, we have the solution, we can go to the party. And of course that was not the case, because what we see is that sometimes there were wrong solutions for the right problems. The reason is that we sometimes copy solutions from other countries. And copy-pasting solutions is the worst thing that you can do if you want to solve a problem. I think Greece, I don't know if there are Greeks here, but the Swedish solutions probably will not work for the Greeks and vice versa. But even if you have the right solutions for a problem, it could be badly implemented. And even if it's the right solution and the correct implementation, we also observe that certain solutions are disconnected from the problems here. So we see a kind of fragmentation of the databases, and we see, especially in federal countries and the federalizing countries, I'm not sure how Scotland will handle geodata, you know, once it's independent. I will not run and jump to the conclusions here, but the structure of countries and the regionalization actually has a huge impact on the organization of data and the communication and the transactions of data. I'm from Belgium, so if you want, I think we have our own challenges as far as that is concerned between the federal and the regional levels, for example, on geodata here. And I think it's an element we should take into account. So if solutions create new problems, and what are the new problems actually in this field here? I think it's dysfunctional autonomy. And dysfunctional autonomy became visible also in the managing of the data that organizations have. Dysfunctional means, well, now we are owner. My agency is owner. If you want to have it, you have to pay for it. We have to have an agreement to exchanges, etc. So it's not so obvious then the more organizations you have, the higher the transaction costs and the higher the chances of having dysfunctional autonomy. We see centrifugal agencies. I'm not going into the details here of the problems caused by solutions, but the new solutions actually that were triggered were hierarchy type mechanisms, market type mechanisms, network type mechanisms, the three mechanisms I just mentioned. Because all the independent and autonomous agencies, actually we see now a reduction of numbers of organizations. So the graph is actually going down now. We see mergers, we see all kinds of reductions of the numbers to actually reduce the transaction costs between organizations here. But still, there is the issue of the hierarchy, markets, and the networks. We also saw an enormous increase in audit capacity. One of my colleagues said that in London there are more auditors than taxi drivers, and I think he said that sounds like a problem. And I think it's an interesting thing to see what can we do about this. I mean, sometimes I'm asked to say, can we jump to the solution? Can we jump from the initial problem to the final solution? The answer is probably not. You need a kind of learning cycle, and you need actually to go through these problems and solutions, iterations, to create ownership of solutions and learn from the past and from the experiences. But what there is to do is, I think, to have ex-ante evaluations of solutions. How will the systems react to solutions? I think that's a very important way, not just to calculate the costs, but also to calculate the benefits, the potential, or the conditionality of the benefits is important here. How will citizens react? And there are different patterns: exit, voice, loyalty. How are the administrations going to act? There could be gaming there. How are politicians going to react if they want quick wins, for example? So it's actually about these negative reactions to shift them to the positive reactions, which are participation, shared ownership, taking responsibility and accountability for the real problems, and mobilizing in a multi-level governance context the policymakers and those that are delivering the services. There's a fourth element of it may end like a very depressing story here, but actually there is each time a kind of to-do list to escape from these traps here. It's a disciplinary issue, and I think here the element is we have to move from a sequential to a simultaneous dynamics. If you look at technology, I mean, many of these things are technology driven. But then the question is, how is it picked up by legal frameworks? How is it picked up by the financial frameworks and the financing and the fees? How is it organized? And then how does it lead to service delivery? And the question is here, what kind of sequence do we have here? I think the sequence of the professions and the disciplines, the academic disciplines, is not a neutral thing. Because the question is, what is the degree of freedom in the next step if you have the previous step? It's called path dependency. So there's a kind of disciplinary path dependency here, where if the technology is at the beginning, the rest is not automatically following. And the question is, would it be able to reverse it? To start with the service delivery. To say this is actually the type of service delivery we need. And therefore we need that kind of organization which we will finance in this way. And therefore we need these legal frameworks which we will change. And then we will actually bring in the technology. That's a kind of Copernican change of the logic. And I'm not saying we should automatically do it everywhere. But I think we should have a kind of debate. The legal frames are actually, we should not underestimate these, and we have common law countries and administrative law countries. I think you should not underestimate the importance of the difference between common law countries and administrative law countries for the dynamics of the public sector itself. I think the councils of state, you have them in France, Belgium, and the Netherlands, sometimes have particular visions which are different from what is technically possible or what is desirable from a service delivery point of view. And I think what we need is, to look at what sequence do we have in place at this moment. What are the dominant disciplines that are actually guiding the others? Who is actually initiating? Who is driving? I think these are important issues which we should not underestimate. The talk with lawyers is not easy at all. I mean, they have different keywords. All the disciplines have different keywords. You know, for technology it's data, for legislation it's ownership, liability, privacy. For finance it's cost and investment. For organizations it's levels of government, and so on. And they are in tension. And we have to actually try to put this on the table and look at the kind of simultaneity. It should be more simultaneous with iterations, and I think that could result to the performance. The final thing is, I'm concluding, is about geo versus organizations. I think it's about organizations versus data. And that may be a bit abstract, but there is a relationship between data and organizations. It could be the relationship is defined as organizations use data, but also data are part of organizations. And I think there's a kind of shift in the way the public service and the public sector is conceived. I will first briefly say, you should be aware in Belgium, for example, we have reorganized the country according to territory, geo, and persons. We have so constitutionally reorganized the country in such a way. We have the regions, we have 3 regions, they are based on geo, territory, and we have communities. We have 3 communities, and they are not overlapping. This is connected to persons, right? So we have reorganized the country according to the geo and the persons definitions. Second, the provinces. We have reduced the competences of the provinces. They were competent for territory, geo, and persons. Now we took away the competences of the persons. They are only competent for geo, for territory issues. So you see that the public sector is, in certain countries, and Belgium is perhaps a special case, looking at this, and this has an impact also on the data and the use of data by organizations. And the shorthand here is that we are moving from organizations with databases which are connected or not connected to actually databases which are integrated with organizations. And that's a kind of Copernican change, a huge transformation in the public sector with a huge impact, I think, not just for the geodata, but for data in general, whether it's financial information or non-financial information, and part of the non-financial information is, of course, the geodata. How to make the obvious happen? It's to match supply and demand. It's to make benefits visible and emphasize that. It's to anticipate problems of solutions. It's to dialogue between professions. I think we need a dialogue between the professions. And it's to reduce the tensions between data and organizations. This is a commercial. Thank you.
Thank you very much.